The year was 2347, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for exactly 50 years. Yet in all that time, the other species had never truly understood the creatures from the small blue planet called Earth. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in her designated seat in the Great Council Chamber, a massive dome that floated in the void between three ancient star systems. And she listened as the representatives of 4,000 civilizations argued about trade routes and territorial disputes and all the petty concerns that seemed to consume the galaxy. She was used to being ignored, and she was used to the whispers that followed her whenever she walked through the station corridors, because to the galaxy at large, humans were nothing special at all. The Galactic Council had a classification system for every species they encountered, and humanity had been labeled as a Class 7 passive species from the very first day of contact, which meant they were considered harmless and weak and not worth taking seriously. Councillor Vrexton of the Dominion of Kar was watching her from across the chamber with his four cold eyes, and Elena pretended not to notice as she reviewed the documents on her display screen. The Dominion was the largest military power in known space, controlling over 200 star systems through pure force and intimidation. And Vrexton had made it his personal mission to understand why humanity confused him so much. He had studied their history, or at least the parts they had shared with the Council, and nothing about them made sense to a warrior like him. Here was a species that had developed nuclear weapons centuries ago, that had split the atom and harnessed the power of stars. And yet they had never conquered a single world by force. They had colonies on dozens of planets across 3 star systems, and every single one of those colonies had been established through peaceful settlement and terraforming rather than invasion. It was unnatural, Vrexton thought, and it was suspicious. After the council session ended, Elena walked back to the human embassy section of the station, and she passed by groups of aliens who barely acknowledged her existence. A pair of Trivaxian merchants snickered as she walked by, making comments about how humans were the galaxy's most boring species, in voices loud enough for her to hear. She simply smiled and kept walking, and that smile made one of the merchants feel strangely uncomfortable without knowing why. Back on Earth, life continued as it had for the past 3 centuries. With billions of people living in relative peace and prosperity across the planet, wars had become historical footnotes, studied in schools the same way ancient Romans studied the civilizations that came before them. And violence existed only in simulation sports and entertainment media. The great cities of Earth were clean and bright, filled with art and music and the sounds of children playing in parks. And visitors from other worlds often commented on how quiet everything seemed. But quiet did not mean empty, and peaceful did not mean weak. And this was something the galaxy had never bothered to learn in the city of Geneva. In a building that looked like an ordinary government office, there was a room that had not been opened in over 200 years. The room contained files and plans and contingencies that dated back to humanity's darkest era, when nations had pointed weapons at each other, capable of ending all life on the planet. And the door to that room had a single word carved into it. Parome Tanchi. U.S. General Marcus Stone was 94 years old, kept alive and healthy by the medical technology that had extended human lifespans well past 2 centuries. And he was one of only 12 people on Earth who knew what was behind that door. He hoped he would die without ever having to open it. But hope was not the same as certainty, and so he checked the security systems every single month without fail. Meanwhile, at the edge of Sol System, a Dominion scout ship was conducting what its captain called a routine survey mission near Jupiter's moon Europa. The mission was not routine at all, and the captain knew exactly what he was doing when he powered up his weapon systems and locked onto the small human research station on the moon's icy surface. The station held 47 scientists and researchers, who were studying the ocean beneath Europa's frozen crust, searching for signs of microbial life that might help them understand the origins of living things in the universe. They had no weapons, and they had no shields, and they had exactly 3 seconds of warning before the Dominion ship opened fire. The explosion was brief and bright against the white surface of the moon, and when it faded, there was nothing left but a smoking crater where the station had once stood. 47 humans died in those 3 seconds, and the Dominion captain recorded the incident as an unfortunate accident caused by a sensor malfunction. Before jumping to faster than light speed and disappearing into the void, the news reached Earth within hours, and the response from humanity surprised everyone in the galaxy who was watching. There were no declarations of war, no threats of revenge, no military ships scrambling to hunt down the attackers. Instead, Ambassador Vasquez filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Council, requesting an official investigation, and a formal apology from the Dominion of Council of Rexton received the complaint and laughed so hard that his aides thought he might injure himself, because this was exactly the response he had expected from such a weak and pathetic species. Sent back a message expressing deep regret for the unfortunate accident and promising that the sensor malfunction would be investigated, and everyone knew it was a lie, and everyone knew that nothing would be done about it on Earth. The families of the 47 dead received the news with grief and anger, and many of them demanded action from their government. But the official response remained the same. Patience and diplomacy would prevail in the city of Berlin. A woman named Sarah Chun stood at her window and looked up at the night sky, thinking about her brother who had died on Europa, and she wondered if the galaxy would ever understand what humanity was capable of. She had read the old histories, the ones that most people preferred to forget, and she knew that her species had once been something very different from the peaceful civilization. They had become humans, had not evolved beyond violence. She knew, because evolution did not work that fast, they had simply chosen to be better. And there was a very important difference between those two things. The Earth remained quiet that night, as it had remained quiet for 300 years. But somewhere deep beneath the surface of things, something ancient and terrible was beginning to stir, and in the great council chamber far away among the stars, Council of Rexton was already planning his next test of humanity's famous restraint. Never suspecting that he was playing a game he did not understand with an opponent he had completely underestimated, the quiet, he would eventually learn, had never been weakness at all. It had been a choice, and choices could be unmade. 3 months had passed since the Europa incident, and the galaxy had already forgotten about the 47 humans who had died on that frozen moon. Because in the grand scale of things, what were 47 lives compared to the trillions that filled the stars? But humanity had not forgotten, and Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the Galactic Council once again, reading yet another formal complaint about yet another incident that everyone knew was no accident at all. In the past 90 days, 12 human cargo ships had disappeared along established trade routes, and a human colony on the distant world of Kepler 442b had been surrounded by Dominion warships that refused to let any vessels enter or leave. 3,000 colonists on that world were running out of food and medicine, and their distress calls were being broadcast across all frequencies for anyone who cared to listen. Very few beings in the galaxy seemed to care. Council of Rexton watched the human ambassador with barely concealed amusement as she presented her evidence and made her requests for intervention, and when she finished speaking, he rose to give his response. The Galactic Council sympathizes with the difficulties facing your species, he said in a voice that dripped with false concern. But we cannot interfere in what appears to be a simple territorial dispute between the Dominion and your colonial administration. There is no dispute. Elena replied, her voice calm and steady despite the anger burning in her chest. Our colony was established legally under council law, and your ships have no right to blockade peaceful civilians. Perhaps your colonists should have chosen a less contested region of space, Brexton suggested with a smile that showed far too many teeth. The galaxy is a dangerous place for those who cannot protect themselves. Laughter rippled through the council chamber, and Elena stood perfectly still as hundreds of alien representatives mocked her and her species with their cruel amusement. She thought about the children on Kepler 442b who would go hungry tonight. And she thought about the families who had lost loved ones on those cargo ships. And she thought about how easy it would be to show these creatures exactly what humanity could do when pushed too far. But she did not say any of those things, because she had been trained to represent the best of her species rather than the worst. And so she simply gathered her documents and walked out of the chamber with her head held high. The Dominion broadcast her speech across 1,000 worlds that night, editing it to make her look even weaker and more pathetic than she had appeared in the chamber. And billions of beings across the galaxy watched and laughed at the silly humans who thought words could protect them from the strong on the Dominion homeworld. Military commanders gathered to discuss the next phase of their plan, because the tests had proven exactly what they suspected. Humans were cowards who would never fight back no matter how hard they were pushed. Their worlds are rich with resources, one commander pointed out, and their population is small enough to be easily managed once we establish control. They have no real military to speak of. Another added, their ships are designed for exploration and trade, not combat. And their weapons technology is laughably primitive compared to our own. Brexton listened to his commanders and nodded in agreement, because everything they said matched his own observations perfectly. Humanity would be the easiest conquest in Dominion history. A soft target that would demonstrate their power to the rest of the galaxy. Without costing them a single ship, the order was given, and the Dominion fleet began to move towards Sol System back on Earth. The news of the approaching armada reached the United Nations headquarters within hours, transmitted by deep space monitoring stations that tracked every ship movement in the sector. President Catherine Park sat in her office and read the report 3 times before she fully accepted what it meant, because this was the moment that humanity had hoped would never come. The moment when their long experiment in peaceful coexistence would be truly tested. She picked up a secure communication device and spoke a single phrase. Convene the Defense Council in bunkers and secure facilities across Earth and every human colony. 12 individuals received the same message and began making their way to a location that did not officially exist. General Marcus Stone was the last to arrive, and as he took his seat at the table, he looked around at the faces of men and women who carried the weight of humanity's darkest secrets on their shoulders. They gave us no choice, President Park said quietly. We tried everything else first, and they gave us no choice. Stone nodded slowly and reached into his pocket, pulling out a key that had been passed down through his family for 7 generations. A key that fit only one lock on the entire planet. The Prometheus Protocol, he said, speaking words that had not been spoken aloud in 200 years. Is everyone prepared to authorize? One by one, the 12 members of the Defense Council gave their consent. And somewhere deep beneath the city of Geneva, ancient systems that have been sleeping for centuries began to wake upon every human world. In every colony and outpost and research station, a single encrypted message was received by those who had been chosen to receive it. A message that contained only 2 words. Prometheus STNDBY. Ambassador Vasquez received the message while she was preparing to evacuate the council station, and she felt a cold weight settle in her stomach as she read those words. She had always known this day might come, but knowing something in theory was very different from facing it in reality. The Dominion fleet arrived at the edge of Sol System 10 days later. A massive armada of 10,000 warships that stretched across millions of kilometers of space like a wall of metal and death. Admiral Krix Veth commanded the fleet from his flagship, a vessel so large that it could be seen from Earth with the naked eye. And he broadcast a message to every human world on all frequencies. People of Earth, he declared in a voice filled with contempt, your government has proven incapable of protecting you from the dangers of the galaxy. And so the Dominion of Kar has graciously decided to offer you protection under our rule. You will surrender unconditionally. You will accept our administrators and our laws. And you will provide us with whatever resources we require in exchange for our generous protection. You have one standard day to respond. And if you refuse, we will be forced to demonstrate the consequences of defiance. The message ended, and silence fell across the human worlds as billions of people waited to see what their leaders would do. In the council station far away, Ambassador Vasquez recorded her own message and transmitted it to the council chamber where Vrexthan and hundreds of other representatives were watching the drama unfold with eager anticipation. To the Galactic Council, she said, her voice steady and clear. We do not mistake patience for weakness, and we hope you will not make the same error. You were warned. The transmission ended, and Vrexthan laughed again, because this was exactly the empty threat he had expected from such a pathetic species. But something about the look in the human ambassador's eyes made a few of the older council members feel suddenly uneasy, as if they had just watched something important happen without understanding what it was. In Geneva, General Stone inserted his key into the lock that had not been opened in 200 years, and as the door swung open to reveal the room beyond, he whispered a prayer to gods he did not believe in. Forgive us for what we are about to do, he said to no one in particular, and forgive us for what we are about to become. The countdown had begun, and humanity's long quiet was about to end. Admiral Krix Veth stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the countdown timer with growing impatience, because the humans had been given one full day to surrender, and that day was almost over. His sensors showed nothing unusual in the Sol system. Just the same small defensive satellites that had been there for decades, and the same unarmed civilian ships that were now trying to flee to the outer planets. Pathetic, he muttered to his second in command. They do not even have the courage to face us with what little they have. The timer reached 0, and Krix Veth opened the channel to all his ships, preparing to give the order that would begin the conquest of humanity. But before he could speak, something strange began happening on his sensor displays. Admiral, one of his officers said in a confused voice, we are detecting unusual gravitational readings from the human moon. Krix Veth turned to look at the tactical display, and what he saw made no sense at all, because the moon called Luna appeared to be moving in ways that no natural satellite should be able to move. Then the surface of the moon began to split open. Massive segments of lunar rock and dust fell away to reveal something that had been hidden beneath for over 300 years. A construction so vast and so terrible that Krix Veth's mind struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. The moon was not a moon at all, or at least not anymore, because someone had hollowed it out and turned it into a weapon platform of unimaginable scale. What is that? His second in command whispered, and Krix Veth had no answer, because he had never seen anything like it in all his years of military service across the Sol system. Other hidden installations were revealing themselves as well. The asteroid belt that surrounded the inner planets was filled with objects that had appeared to be ordinary rocks for centuries. But now those rocks were powering up and extending weapons arrays that made Dominion technology look like children's toys. Human cargo ships throughout the system were undergoing transformations of their own, their hull plates sliding back to reveal weapon systems that had been concealed beneath. turning harmless trading vessels into deadly warships in a matter of seconds. "This is impossible," Kriksveth said, staring at his displays in disbelief. "Our intelligence said they had no military capability. Our scouts said they were defenseless." "They lied to us," his officer replied in a voice that trembled with sudden fear. "They have been lying to the entire galaxy for 300 years. The truth was even worse than a lie. Because humanity had not hidden their weapons out of deception or malice, they had hidden them out of shame 300 years ago. At the end of the war that had nearly destroyed their entire species, the survivors had looked at what they had created and what they had done to each other. And they had made a choice. They would put away their weapons, but they would not destroy them. Because they knew their own nature too well to believe they would never need them again. They had hoped, oh how they had hoped, that the day would never come when those weapons would need to be used again. But hope was not the same as certainty. And now the day had come. General Stone's voice echoed across all frequencies as he broadcast. From the command center deep beneath Geneva to the Dominion fleet, he said in a voice that carried the weight of centuries. "We are not a peaceful species, and we never were. We are a restrained species, which is something very different and something you should have taken the time to understand before you threatened our children and murdered our people. Every day, every single human being makes a choice not to be what we once were, not to become the monsters that nearly ended our own existence 300 years ago. You have made that choice very difficult today. You have one chance to withdraw your fleet and return to your own space. And if you refuse, you will learn why humanity spent 3 centuries trying to forget what we are capable of." Admiral Kriksveth's response was to order his fleet to open fire. Because he was a warrior of the Dominion, and warriors did not retreat from threats, no matter how impressive the display. 10,000 Dominion warships unleashed their weapons at once, filling the space around Earth with enough firepower to destroy a dozen worlds. The weapons fire traveled toward its targets at incredible speed, and then it simply stopped. Every missile, every energy beam, every projectile hung motionless in the void, as if time itself had frozen around them, suspended by gravitational fields so precise and so powerful that Dominion scientists would spend decades trying to understand how they worked. "What have you done?" Kriksveth screamed into his communication system. But there was no response from the humans. Instead, the frozen weapons fire simply vanished, converted into harmless energy that dissipated into the void. And the Dominion fleet found itself completely defenseless. Their engines would not respond. Their weapons would not fire. Their shields would not activate. Because every ship in the Armada had been locked in place by forces they could not see and could not understand. A single human vessel approached the flagship. A ship no larger than a standard shuttle that looked almost comical compared to the massive Dominion warship it was approaching. The shuttle did not fire any weapons, did not make any threatening moves, simply came to rest a few hundred meters from the flagship's bridge and transmitted a single message. "We could kill every single one of you right now." The message read, "We could destroy your fleet, and then we could destroy your homeworld, and then we could hunt down every Dominion ship in the galaxy and end your species forever. We have done such things before, to ourselves, and we know exactly how easy it would be. But we choose not to. We choose mercy, even though you do not deserve it, because we refuse to become what we once were. Remember this moment, Admiral. And remember that the humans chose to let you live. Remember it when you return to your masters and tell them what happened here today. Remember that we could have been monsters, and we chose to be something else instead." The shuttle turned and flew back toward Earth, leaving the Dominion fleet frozen and helpless in the void on the bridge of his flagship. Admiral Kriksveth stared at the message on his screen and felt something he had never experienced before in his entire military career. He felt genuine terror. Not of the weapons that had disabled his fleet, but of the beings who had built those weapons and chosen not to use them. What kind of creatures could create such power and then restrain themselves from using it? What kind of monsters had humanity been before they learned to hold themselves back? And what would happen to the galaxy if they ever stopped holding back? Far away in the council chamber, Councillor Rexton watched the sensor data from Sol system with growing horror as he realized that everything he thought he knew about humans was wrong. They were not weak. They were not cowards. They were not easy prey for the strong. They were predators who had taught themselves to act like prey. Apex hunters who had chosen to put away their claws. And they had just shown the galaxy exactly what happened when someone was foolish enough to make them bare those claws against the quiet. Rexton finally understood. Had never been weakness, it had been a warning. And he had been too arrogant to hear it. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by 1,000 different communication networks and whispered in 100,000 different languages. Because what had happened in Sol System changed everything that anyone thought they knew about the universe, the humans. Those quiet and boring creatures who had been mocked and dismissed for 50 years had revealed themselves as something entirely different from what anyone had imagined. Galactic Council descended into chaos as species that had spent centuries building. Their power suddenly realized that all their calculations had been based on a lie. Emergency sessions were called and then cancelled, and then called again as representatives screamed at each other and demanded answers that no one could provide. Counselor Rex then sat alone in his chambers and stared at the wall, unable to process the magnitude of his failure, because he had been the one to push for the test that had awakened humanity's hidden strength. His government was already collapsing back on the Dominion homeworld, where citizens were rioting in the streets and military commanders were turning on each other as they tried to assign blame for the disaster. The Dominion fleet remained frozen in Sol System for 3 days before the humans finally released them. And when those ships limped home with their weapons permanently disabled, they brought with them stories that would haunt the Dominion for generations. Admiral Crixbeth refused to speak about what had happened, and he retired from military service the day after he returned, spending the rest of his life in quiet seclusion on a remote colony world. The other species of the galaxy reacted to the news in different ways, depending on their history with humanity. Those who had been kind to the humans during their years as a passive species suddenly remembered old friendship treaties and trade agreements, and rushed to the human embassy to remind Ambassador Vasquez of their long and valued relationship. Those who had mocked and bullied and cheated the humans found themselves very worried about what might happen next, and many of them quietly began preparing evacuation plans just in case. Ambassador Vasquez returned to the council chamber for the first time since the confrontation, and this time no one laughed. When she entered the room, she walked to her designated seat in perfect silence, and 4,000 representatives watched her every move with a mixture of fear and fascination and desperate curiosity. Have been asked to address this council, she began in a voice that filled the chamber without any need for amplification, and to explain what happened and why. Very well, I will explain. She stood and looked around the room at all the alien faces that had once looked at her with contempt, and she saw how that contempt had been replaced by something else entirely. Humanity's history is written in blood, she said. More blood than most of you can imagine. Because for 10,000 years, we did nothing but fight and kill and conquer each other. We invented weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. And then we used those weapons on each other. Not once, but twice, killing hundreds of thousands of innocent people in moments. We built bombs that could end all life on our planet, and we pointed them at each other for decades. coming within minutes of destroying ourselves on more than one occasion. We committed genocides and atrocities that I will not describe because the details would give you nightmares for the rest of your lives. And then, 300 years ago, we finally went too far. The war that followed killed 90% of our population and left our planet scarred and poisoned. And when the survivors crawled out of their shelters and saw what we had done, they made a choice. They chose to be different. Not because they had evolved beyond violence or lost their capacity for destruction, but because they had finally understood the true cost of what they were. Every human being alive today carries the same capacity for violence that our ancestors carried, the same potential for terrible destruction. And every single day we choose not to use it. That is what restraint means. Not the absence of power, but the choice not to use it. The chamber was completely silent as she spoke. And even the oldest and most powerful representatives found themselves unable to look away from this small human who was teaching them something they had never understood. You tested us, she continued. You killed our people and threatened our children and laughed at our requests for justice because you thought our restraint was weakness. Now you know the truth. We are not weak. We are dangerous beyond anything you have ever faced. And the only thing standing between you and our full capability is our choice to be better than what we once were. She paused and looked directly at the section where Counselor Rexton sat, alone and broken in his seat. We are offering you something today, she said. Something that we could have taken by force if we wanted to, because after what you did to us, no one would have blamed us for destroying the Dominion and anyone else who stood in our way. We are offering you civilization, real civilization, not the pretend version you have been practicing for millions of years, where the strong take what they want and the weak suffer in silence. From this day forward, the Galactic Council will establish real laws with real consequences. And those laws will protect the weak from the strong, because that is what civilization actually means. There will be no more provocations. No more tests, no more disappeared ships or blockaded colonies or murdered scientists. If you break these laws, there will be consequences. And those consequences will be delivered by humanity, because we have proven that we are the only species in this galaxy capable of enforcing justice without being corrupted by the power to do so. We do not want to rule you, and we do not want to conquer you. And we certainly do not want to destroy you. But we will do what is necessary to ensure that what happened to our people never happens again. Not to us, and not to any other species that lacks the power to protect itself. General Stone's face appeared on every screen in the chamber. Projected from Earth across the vast distances of space, the ambassador has explained what we are offering, he said. And I'm here to explain the alternative. We have seen what we become when we stop restraining ourselves. And you have not. Trust me when I tell you that you do not want to see it. You do not want to know what humans are capable of when we decide that mercy is no longer an option. Accept our offer. Follow the new laws, and we will remain what we have tried to be for the past 3 centuries. Friends and partners, who want nothing more than to explore the universe in peace. Refuse, and you will learn why we spent 300 years trying to forget what we are. The choice is yours. The transmission ended. And for a long moment, no one in the council chamber moved or spoke. Then, one by one, the representatives began to signal their agreement with humanity's terms. Because they had seen what the humans could do, and they had no desire to see what else they might be capable of. The Dominion of Kar, or what was left of it, was the last to agree. And when Vrexton finally raised his hand to signal his consent, he looked like a being who had aged 1,000 years in a single week. The new era of the Galactic Council had begun. And for the first time in millions of years, the strong would not be allowed to prey on the weak simply because they could all. Because a species that had learned to be better had been pushed too far, and had shown the galaxy what real power looked like. 5 years had passed since the confrontation that changed the galaxy forever, and the universe was a very different place than it had been before humanity revealed its true nature. The Galactic Council still met in the Great Chamber between the three ancient star systems. But the debates that took place, there were nothing like the ones that had come before. Real laws had been established. Laws that protected the weak and held the strong accountable. And those laws were enforced by a coalition of species led by humans, who had proven that power without wisdom was nothing but destruction. Waiting to happen, Ambassador Elena Vasquez had retired from her position, replaced by younger diplomats who had grown up in a galaxy that respected humanity rather than mocking them. And she spent her days writing about her experiences for future generations to learn from. General Marcus Stone had passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his family, and knowing that the weapons he had guarded for so long would probably never need to be used again. Prometheus facilities remained hidden, maintained by new generations of caretakers who understood their purpose, because humanity knew better than to believe that darkness would never return. But for now, the galaxy was at peace, real peace rather than the pretend version that had existed before. And that peace was built on the foundation of humanity's terrible gift, the knowledge of what destruction truly meant on the former Dominion homeworld. A being named Rexton sat in his small apartment and waited for a visitor who was coming from very far away. He had requested this meeting months ago, sending a message to Earth, asking if Ambassador Vasquez would be willing to speak with him one more time. And to his surprise, she had agreed. The door opened and she entered, looking older than she had 5 years ago, but somehow lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you for coming," Rexton said, gesturing for her to sit in the chair he had prepared for her. She sat down and looked at him with eyes that held no hatred, no anger, no desire for revenge. Just the kind of sad understanding that made him feel ashamed in ways he could not explain. "Why did you want to see me?" she asked him. Rexton was silent for a long moment, trying to find the words for a question that had haunted him for 5 years. "I need to understand," he finally said, "because nothing about your species makes sense to me, and I cannot rest until I understand. You could have destroyed us," he continued. "You could have ended the Dominion and punished us for what we did to your people, and no one in the galaxy would have blamed you for it. Why did you not do it? Why did you choose mercy when we deserved destruction?" Elena looked at him for a long time before she answered. And when she spoke, her voice was gentle in a way that seemed impossible from a being whose species had just revealed itself as the most dangerous force in the galaxy. "Because mercy is harder than vengeance," she said, "and because restraint requires more strength than rage. We spent 10,000 years learning that lesson in blood, watching our own species tear itself apart again and again, because someone always had to pay for what had been done before. We learned that revenge creates more revenge, that destruction creates more destruction, that the cycle only ends when someone is strong enough to break it. We refuse to unlearn that lesson, no matter how much easier it would be to give in to what we feel." Rexton considered her words and found that they made a strange kind of sense, even though they described a way of thinking that was completely foreign to everything he had been taught. "Your species frightens me," he admitted, "not because of your weapons or your technology, but because of what you choose to do with your power. I have never met beings who could do what you can do, and then choose not to do it. It seems impossible. Like trying to hold back a flood with your bare hands." Elena smiled, and there was something both sad and proud in that smile. "It is the hardest thing we do," she agreed. "Every single day, every single human being. We all fight the same battle against our own nature. We are not saints, and we are not angels, and we do not always succeed. But we keep trying, because we know what happens when we stop." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had once been the capital of the most feared military power in the galaxy and was now just another world, struggling to find its place in a changing universe. "Do you want to know the real secret?" she asked. "The thing that makes humanity different from every other species we have encountered?" Rex then nodded, desperate for any knowledge that might help him understand. "We care," she said simply, "about everything and everyone, with an intensity that sometimes frightens even us. We love our children so much that we would burn worlds to protect them. And we hate injustice so much that we would tear down empires to stop it. And we want to be good so much that we spent 3 centuries pretending to be harmless, just to avoid the temptation of using our power. That is why we are dangerous. Not because of what we can do, but because of how much we care about doing the right thing. And that is why we chose mercy. Because we care about being the kind of beings who choose mercy, even when it would be so much easier not to." She turned back to face him, and Rex then saw something in her eyes that he had never seen in any being before. Compassion without weakness. Strength without cruelty. Power without corruption. "The galaxy is very lucky," she said quietly. "That what we care about most is being good." She walked to the door and paused before leaving, looking back at the being who had once ordered the deaths of her people and the conquest of her world. "Find something to care about." "Rex, then," she said. "Something worth building instead of destroying. Something worth protecting instead of conquering. That is how you become more than what you were. That is how everyone does." She left, and Rex then sat alone in his apartment for a long time, thinking about what she had said and wondering if it was possible for an old warrior to learn new ways of being on Earth. Life continued much as it had for 300 years, with children playing in parks and artists creating beautiful things and scientists exploring the mysteries of the universe. The weapons remained hidden, maintained and ready, but gathering dust as the years passed without any need to use them. Other species sent delegations to study humanity, trying to understand how they had controlled their violent nature and built a civilization that valued peace without losing its edge. The answer they received was always the same, and it was both simpler and more difficult than anyone expected. Humans had not controlled anything. They were told, because control implied that the violence had been removed or suppressed or locked away instead. Every human still carried the full capacity for terrible destruction inside them. And every single day they chose not to use it. That was the secret, the visitors were told. The choice that had to be made again and again without end. And if they wanted to become like humans, they would have to make that choice too on a distant world at the edge of explored space. A young alien diplomat named Kirishan visited Earth for the first time. Walking through the streets of a human city with an elderly professor as her guide, she watched human children playing a game in a park, shouting and laughing and competing with fierce intensity over something that seemed completely meaningless. "They are so aggressive," she observed. "Even at play, they fight like warriors." The professor smiled and nodded, watching the children with obvious affection. "Yes," he agreed. "We have always been this way, full of fire and passion and the determination to win at whatever we do." "But you have peace," Kirishan said, confused. "Your world is quiet and safe, and there is no war, because we learned to aim that fire at better things," the professor explained. "Instead of using our passion to destroy each other, we use it to build and explore and create. The fire never goes away, but we choose what we burn." Kirishan watched the children finish their game and shake hands with their opponents, fierce competitors becoming friends again in an instant. And she finally began to understand what made humanity different. They were not peaceful beings who had learned to be dangerous. They were dangerous beings who had learned to be peaceful, and somehow, that was more impressive than anything else she had ever encountered. She looked up at the sky. thinking about all the worlds and species that now lived under the protection of humanity's terrible gift. And she realized that the galaxy's future had never been more uncertain or more hopeful. Everything depended on humans continuing to make the same choice they made every day. The choice to be better than what they could be. The choice to care about things that mattered more than power. It was a fragile foundation for a civilization, built on nothing but will and hope, and the stubborn refusal to give up on the idea that the universe could be good. But somehow, against all odds, it was working, and somewhere in the vastness of space, on a small blue planet that had remained quiet for so long, billions of human beings woke up and faced another day, carrying the weight of their terrible potential and choosing once again to be something more. The Earth remained quiet, and the galaxy was grateful.